Have you ever woken up at 3 a.m.? Not from a noise, but from a nameless, chilling premonition of death. That night, I was lying in my bedroom, and when I reached out, my hand only touched the cold, empty pillow where my wife should have been. Through the thin curtains, I saw her silhouette huddled on the balcony, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering in the bone-chilling cold. I was about to breathe a sigh of relief, thinking she was just having a sleepless night. But as I quickly pulled back the comforter to bring it out to her, I glanced down at the floor and a cold dread washed over me. On the hardwood, stretching from the bedroom door to the balcony entrance, was a long, wet trail, as if someone had stood there, dripping. My hands started to tremble as I slid the glass door open, and what I saw in the early morning light changed everything. It all started at dinner that evening. My older sister, Susan, was visiting from back home and had brought a special cut of beef for a pot roast. My wife, Sarah, was always gentle and accommodating, bustling around, setting the table, making sure everything was perfect. But still, it wasn't good enough for Susan. "A pot roast needs to be slow-cooked to be tender," she said. "Preparing it like this is a waste of good meat." I glanced at Sarah. She just lowered her head in silence. I knew Sarah was a wonderful cook, but I chose to stay quiet. Susan was my sister, I was her little brother, and arguing would only make things worse. After dinner, Sarah went to the kitchen to clean up, and I sat with Susan, who was having a glass of wine. She went on and on about how a wife should be this way, that way. Then, she suddenly lowered her voice. "Listen, I've been noticing something. Your wife. She's been taking your money and sending it to her mother. I see her making discreet bank transfers every month." I was stunned. "What are you talking about? Sarah isn't like that." Susan smirked. "Oh, she isn't? Then why did I overhear her on the phone yesterday, saying, 'Wait until I can scrape a little more together, and I'll send it, Mom?' Where do you think she's getting that money? From you, of course." My heart began to pound. I swallowed hard. Susan added more fuel to the fire. "You can be blind if you want. Girls from small towns who marry a city guy, how many of them don't try to bleed their husbands dry to support their family back home? Just check your bank account, you'll see." I fell silent. I didn't want to believe it, but her words cut deep into my mind. That night, lying next to Sarah, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. I secretly opened my phone and checked our joint bank statement. My heart stopped when I saw 3 transfers, each for $200, all to an unfamiliar account number. The blood rushed to my head. I gasped for air. It turned out, Susan was right. The feeling of betrayal was suffocating. I wanted to throw off the covers, shake Sarah awake, and demand an explanation right then and there. But I held myself back. I told myself I had to get to the bottom of this, but I had to be smart about it. The next morning, while Sarah was hanging laundry on the balcony, I went out to join her. I tried to keep my voice casual. "Hey, honey, is your mom okay? Is she sick or does she need money for anything?" Sarah flinched, her face turning pale. She stammered, My mom's fine, why do you ask?" Seeing the way she avoided my eyes, the anger flared up again. I hardened my voice. "Then who were the 3 transfers for last month, totaling $600? And don't tell me you saved it from the grocery money." Sarah froze, her hands gripping the clothesline. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Just then, Susan, who had heard us from downstairs, came up. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a knowing look in her eyes. Sarah's silence drove me mad. I yelled, "I'm asking you, where did that money go? Tell me." Sarah burst into tears, her voice trembling. I just wanted to help." Before she could finish, Susan cut in. "Help who? Your family, right? I told you. The kind to bleed you dry, married but only thinking about her own folks." That was the last straw. I completely lost control. I pointed to the balcony, where the November air was already getting cold. "Get out there and think about what you've done. You can come back in when you're ready to tell the truth." Sarah stared at me in disbelief. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. She looked at me, then at Susan, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. Without a word, she stepped out onto the balcony. The glass door slammed shut. I stood there, my hands still shaking. I looked through the frosted glass and saw her sink to the floor, her small frame trembling in the cold wind. Susan walked over and patted my shoulder. "You have to be firm like that, or she'll walk all over you." I didn't answer. I looked at the door. Then, I slid the deadbolt and turned the key. Not to open it, but to lock it from the inside. I lay on the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. The clock struck 11 p.m., the room was dark, save for the streetlight filtering through the blinds, casting a pale stripe of light on the wall. I listened. It was strangely quiet. Not a single sound from the balcony. She's probably still angry, I told myself. Women get like that. Give her time. But I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned. The ceiling fan whirred overhead. The old blades creaked with each rotation, like a soft moan. I hated that sound. But tonight, I focused on it, trying to avoid listening for something else. The sound I dreaded most right now, the silence from the balcony. Midnight. I sat up and reached for the glass of water on the nightstand. My hand was shaking so badly that I spilled a few drops. I cursed under my breath, wiping my hand on the bedsheet before lying back down. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force myself to sleep, but my mind was a chaotic mess of images. Sarah, huddled out there. Was she cold? Or had her anger passed? Was she leaning against the railing, waiting for me to open the door? I shook my head, dismissing the thought. No, I had locked it. She would have to knock if she wanted in. And I hadn't heard any knocking. 1 a.m. I was wide awake. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness. I could make out the grain of the wood on the dresser across the room. I started noticing the smallest sounds, a motorcycle speeding down the street, a distant dog barking, the drip of the faucet in the bathroom. But no knock on the door. And no sound from the balcony. Absolute silence. A sense of unease began to creep in. I knew her. She had a temper, but it cooled quickly. Normally, after a fight, she'd be sulking for a few hours at most before cuddling up to me to make up. Why was this time so different? 2 a.m.? I couldn't take it anymore. I shot up in bed and switched on the nightstand lamp. The weak, yellow light made the room feel even more desolate. I looked toward the balcony door. The frosted glass was still, the deadbolt still firmly in place. I glanced down at the base of the door. The wet trail from earlier was almost dry, leaving just a faint, damp patch. I swallowed hard, my throat parched. 3 a.m. I got up and walked barefoot to the door. Each step was a cold imprint on the hardwood floor. I pressed my ear against the glass, listening. My heart hammered against my ribs, so loud I was afraid it would drown out any other sound. But there was nothing. No sigh, no sniffle, not even the sound of her calling my name, the way she always did when she was ready to make peace. I whispered through the crack in the door, "Sarah? Are you asleep?" Silence. I tapped lightly on the glass. Knock knock. Silence. A blade of ice shot up my spine. I fumbled with the deadbolt. My hands were shaking too much. It took several seconds to slide the latch. Finally, the door slid open. A gust of cold wind rushed in. The balcony was empty. I scanned it frantically. From one corner to the other, there was nothing but a few potted plants, the clothes rack with laundry still hanging, and on the tiled floor, a small puddle of water. I looked at the railing. Her footprints were pressed into the grime, the toes pointing outward. I leaned over the railing and looked down. The street below was deserted, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights. Beneath a large oak tree on the sidewalk, there was a heap of something white. I couldn't see it clearly. I didn't dare to look too closely. I stood there, my hands gripping the cold metal railing, my nails digging into the peeling paint. The night wind howled, whipping my hair into a mess. I looked down at my own bare, dusty feet. If she was okay, why would she leave? If she left, why were her footprints still here? If she wasn't okay, why hadn't I heard anything? A dozen questions swirled in my head, but one rose above them all, repeating like a curse. Why did I lock the door? Why? Dawn broke, a murky white light piercing through the morning mist, illuminating my gaunt face. I had been standing there for 3 hours, leaning against the doorframe, my eyes fixed on the empty space below. My entire body was numb. My bare feet frozen, but I couldn't move. I was afraid. Afraid of the moment I would have to face the truth. Finally, as the first rays of sun began to sharpen the edges of the city, I heard footsteps pounding up the stairs. My sister, Susan, her face drained of all color, burst onto the landing. She was panting, her hair a mess, her hand shaking as she pointed downward. "Did you see? Down there? There's a white pile under the tree?" I didn't answer. I just nodded, my eyes still glued to that spot. Susan crept closer to the railing, her body trembling, trying to get a better look. Then she let out a heart-wrenching scream, covered her face with her hands, and collapsed onto the cold tiles. Oh my God, oh my God. The girl. She couldn't form the words, just sobbed hysterically. My heart stopped. I looked down at my sister, at her trembling hands pointing toward the tree. I swallowed, my throat so dry it felt like I'd swallowed sand. I tightened my grip on the railing, my knuckles turning white. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and then opened them. I had to go down. I had to see for myself. I turned and walked, each step heavy, back into the room. My legs felt like they were made of lead. I reached for my jacket hanging on the bedpost, but my hands were shaking so much I dropped it. It took me a few seconds to pick it up. I opened the dresser to get my keys, but they slipped through my trembling fingers, clattering loudly on the floor. The sound echoed in the silent room. I picked up the keys and walked out into the hallway. The stairwell was long and dark. I went down one step at a time, my hand gripping the cold banister. Down on the ground floor, I pushed open the heavy glass door. The morning chill hit my face, making me shiver. The street was quiet, except for a few early morning joggers. They were huddled together in a small group, whispering and pointing toward the oak tree. I walked in that direction. The closer I got, the heavier my legs became, my knees threatening to buckle. I saw a heap of white fabric tangled at the base of the tree. It was her nightgown. The one she had been wearing last night. I stopped, my body rigid, the blood in my veins turning to ice. I wanted to close my eyes, but they were wide open, staring at that white heap. Then I saw a hand. A small, pale hand extending from the fabric. The fingers were splayed, clawing at the damp earth. On her ring finger, the wedding band was still there, glinting in the morning sun. I felt nothing. I just stood there, watching as passers-by stared and whispered. Someone ran to call the police. Another person approached, about to ask me something. But I heard nothing. All sound was muffled. I could only hear my own heartbeat and, in my head, a single question, echoing endlessly, why did she jump? Why did she jump? I took a few more steps. Closer. I saw her face. It was turned to the side, her hair fanned out, covering half of it. But I knew it was her. My Sarah. She lay there, motionless, like a discarded doll. And then I saw it. Her other hand was clenched in a tight fist, so tight the knuckles were white. Sticking out from her fist was the corner of a piece of paper. A crumpled note. I knelt, my own hands trembling as I tried to pry open her stiff fingers. It took several minutes before I could retrieve the note. I unfolded it. It was a page torn hastily from a notebook, with just a few lines of messy, hurried script. I read it, and I froze. I read it again, and again. My lips moved, but no sound came out. I called her name. Sarah? No answer. I ran. I ran like a madman down the street, screaming her name until my voice was raw. Sarah! Neighbors opened their doors, their strange eyes fixed on me. Someone called out, "Hey, what's wrong?" I didn't answer. I just ran. My bare feet slapped against the cold pavement, sharp bits of gravel digging into my skin, but I felt nothing. I ran from one block to the next, peering behind every tree, every bush, every dark corner. I overturned piles of garbage bags on the curb, sending rats scattering in a panic. An old woman on her way to the market saw me, shook her head, and muttered, "That poor boy must have lost his mind." I didn't care. I just had to find my wife. Then I remembered my phone. I pulled it from my pocket, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped it. I dialed her number. A recorded voice answered, "The subscriber you have dialed is not available." I called again. And again, the same emotionless voice. I buried my face in my hands, gasping for breath. I ran back home, up the stairs, and into our room. I looked around. Her slippers were still neatly placed at the foot of the bed. Her phone was on the nightstand, next to a half-empty glass of water, its battery low, the indicator light blinking red. I picked it up. The screen showed a missed call from an unknown number at 3:17 a.m. I called back. No one answered. Just then, Susan ran up from downstairs, her face ashen. She grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. "What is it? Did you find her?" I shook my head, my eyes still fixed on the phone's screen. Susan let go of me, staggered back a few steps, and sank onto the bed. Her face was pale, her lips moving silently. "Oh God, is this my fault? Is it because of my big mouth?" I looked at her. In her eyes, I saw genuine panic. Tears began to stream down her face. She covered her mouth, sobbing. "It's all my fault. I just had to meddle. I egged you on." She couldn't speak anymore, just buried her face in her trembling hands. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, looking at her, my mind in turmoil. Part of me wanted to blame her, but another part knew the person most at fault was me. I was the one who locked that door. I went back to the nightstand and picked up Sarah's phone. I opened her text messages. The most recent one was an unsent draft, written at 2:53 a.m. The message was just a few words. "I'm so sorry, but I can't take it anymore. My mom is very sick. I needed the money urgently, but I was afraid you'd worry if you knew. That money." The message was unfinished, unsent. My heart stopped. I read those lines over and over, unable to believe my eyes. So the money was for her mother's medical bills. So she was silent because she was afraid I would worry. And I didn't ask. I didn't give her a chance to explain. I just listened to my sister, got angry, and threw her out on the balcony in the middle of the night. I collapsed to my knees on the floor, my whole body shaking, tears finally streaming down my cheeks. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe this was how it all happened. I looked up at the balcony door, at the frosted glass that I had locked so securely last night. I slammed my fist on the floor, the pain sharp and absolute. I was a terrible husband. I was a monster. Just then, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered it immediately, my voice hoarse. "Hello. Hello, who is this?" On the other end, a calm, professional female voice spoke. "Excuse me, is this the husband of Sarah Miller?" "Yes, this is he," I managed to say. "This is Dr. Evans from the emergency department at City General Hospital. Miss Miller is here. Can you come right away? Hello? Are you there? How is she? Is she okay?" I yelled into the phone, but the voice on the other end was cold and detached. "Please come to the emergency department at City General as soon as you can." Click. The line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the hollow dial tone. Then I bolted. I ran out of the room, down the stairs, my bare feet pounding on the cold tile. Susan yelled from behind me. "Where are you going?" "Where?" I didn't answer. I threw open the front door and jumped on my motorcycle. The keys. Where were the keys? I patted my pockets, my jacket, frantically searching. I couldn't find them. I jumped off the bike, ran back up to the room, and tore the bed apart. I finally found them under the bed. I bent down to grab them, hitting my head hard on the bed frame, but I didn't feel the pain. I ran back down, started the engine. The bike shot forward into the dim morning light. The streets were empty, save for a few pedestrians. I twisted the throttle all the way, the engine roaring, shattering the quiet. A red light. I didn't stop. I blew straight through the intersection. Horns blared behind me. I didn't care. I just had to get to the hospital. Fast. The handlebars vibrated under my trembling hands. My fingers were numb, gripping the handles tightly. In my mind, 1,000 fragments of memory collided. Sarah's face as she stepped onto the balcony, the last look she gave me. There was no resentment, no anger, just a vast sadness, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. I shook my head, trying to banish the image. No, she's okay. She has to be okay. But why the hospital? Why the ER? I remembered the smallest details from last night. When she was clearing the table, she had looked at me and smiled. Why didn't I notice that smile yesterday? There was something forced about it, something tired. When Susan was talking about the money, she just kept her head down. I thought she was admitting guilt. It turns out she was silent because she couldn't speak, because she was afraid I would worry. And I didn't give her a chance. I just looked at the numbers on the bank statement, at my sister's words, and condemned her. Tears started to stream down my face. The cold morning wind whipped against them, making my skin sting. I didn't wipe them away. I deserved to cry. I deserved this feeling. I was the worst husband in the world. My bike turned onto the road, leading to the hospital. From a distance, I could see the familiar Red Cross sign. My heart pounded erratically. I stopped the bike right in front of the entrance, almost falling because I didn't put the kickstand down in time. I ran inside. The hospital lobby was already crowded. The sharp, cloying smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils, a smell that would haunt my nightmares. The sound of a crying child, the hushed whispers of families, the overhead speaker calling out patients' names. I ran to the reception desk, out of breath. "Excuse me, I'm looking for a patient, Sarah Miller." She was just brought to the ER. "Where is she?" The nurse looked up at me, a look of pity in her eyes. She answered slowly. "One moment, sir, let me check." She turned to her computer and began typing. I stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the counter, my whole body shaking. Every second felt like an eternity. I looked around, at the strange, waiting faces, at the closed doors of the patient rooms. The nurse looked up. "Sarah Miller is currently in emergency room 3, on the second floor. Take the stairs at the end of the hall and turn right." I didn't even have time to say thank you before I was running toward the stairs. My footsteps echoed in the large space. On the second floor, I ran down the corridor. On either side were long benches, filled with anxious family members. Some had their faces in their hands, others stared blankly into space. ER 3. The white door was shut tight, a red light glowing above it. I stood in front of that door, not daring to enter, my heart feeling like it had stopped. I raised my hand, about to knock, but it froze midair. What if she didn't make it? What if I never got to say I was sorry? Just then, the door opened. A doctor in a white coat stepped out, her face tense. She looked at me and asked in a dry voice, "Are you family for Sarah Miller?" I nodded, unable to speak. The doctor studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "Please come in." I stepped into the emergency room. The bright, white fluorescent lights glared off the cold tile floor. The overwhelming smell of rubbing alcohol made me want to gag. Inside, doctors and nurses were gathered around a bed. I couldn't see my wife. I only saw white curtains pulled around the bed and the shadows of people moving behind them. The doctor led me to a corner of the room and pulled a privacy curtain. She looked at me, her expression serious. "You're the patient's husband?" I nodded, swallowing hard. Is she okay, doctor?" The doctor didn't answer right away. She glanced at a chart in her hand, then looked back at me. "Her condition has stabilized for now, but we've found some irregularities. My heart felt a little lighter hearing the word stabilized. But her next words made me freeze. Irregularities? What kind of irregularities? The doctor stared at me. I need to ask you a few questions. Please answer as accurately as you can. I nodded, my mind reeling. The doctor began. Last night, did your wife eat or drink anything unusual? Any strange foods or medications? I shook my head. No. We had a normal dinner. Pot roast, green beans, mashed potatoes. The doctor jotted down notes, then asked, during the meal, did she show any strange symptoms? Like nausea, dizziness, or stomach pain? I tried to remember. No. She seemed fine, ate normally. The doctor frowned. Are you sure? Perhaps you didn't notice. I was silent. She was right, I hadn't been paying attention. Last night, I was consumed by my sister's words, by the numbers on the bank statement. Did I watch my wife eat? Did I ask her how she was? No. I did nothing. I just sat there, stewing in my anger, refusing to speak to her. Tears welled up in my eyes again. I shook my head, my voice choked. I don't remember clearly. We had a misunderstanding. I wasn't paying much attention. The doctor looked at me with a strange expression. She continued, and after the meal? Did she do anything? Drink anything else? Did anyone visit the house? I shook my head. No one came over. It was just my sister, my wife, and me. After dinner, she cleaned up and then we argued. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the balcony. I couldn't admit that I had thrown her out and locked the door. Shame and guilt were strangling me. The doctor scribbled furiously, then she stopped and looked at me, her voice low. Are you aware of your wife taking any medication? Any kind at all, even vitamins, herbal supplements, anything? I was surprised. Medication? No, my wife is healthy. She doesn't take anything. Maybe an iron pill now and then. But why are you asking? What's wrong with her? The doctor was silent for a long moment. She looked at me, then toward the bed, then back at me. In her eyes, I could read hesitation and a deep, unspoken concern. Finally, she spoke slowly, enunciating each word. When she was brought in, the patient was in a coma. Her pupils were constricted, and her heart rate was abnormally slow. We ran an emergency blood test. The results show that her blood contains a large amount. She paused, looking directly into my eyes. My whole body tensed, my heart pounding. A large amount of what? I held my breath. The doctor continued, her voice echoing in the quiet ER. A large amount of sleeping pills. Enough to be fatal if she hadn't been brought to the hospital in time. I was stunned, unable to believe what I was hearing. Suicide. My wife. She was a gentle soul, but I never imagined she could do something so drastic. Doctor, are you sure? There must be a mistake. My wife, she would never. The doctor shook her head and handed me the lab report. The results are clear. The concentration of barbiturates in her blood is very high. We had to perform an emergency gastric lavage. I took the paper, my hand shaking, staring at the numbers and letters without understanding any of them. My mind was spinning. Suicide. She had tried to kill herself. And I had locked her on the balcony, leaving her alone in the cold night. I thought she was just having a tantrum, that she would get over it in a few hours. I never imagined she had already taken the pills. I never imagined she went out to the balcony not to get away from me, but to wait for death. The doctor looked at me, her gaze pointed. Do you know if your wife has been using sleeping pills regularly? Or did she just recently acquire them? I shook my head. I don't know. She never complained about not being able to sleep. I never saw her take any pills. The doctor made a note, then said, please wait here a moment. We need to run some more specialized tests. There are a few other indicators that are also abnormal. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. Chaotic thoughts swirled in my mind. Why would she do this? Was it just because of a few $100s, just because I yelled at her and threw her out? Or was there something else? I remembered the past few weeks. Sarah had often been tired, often sitting alone, lost in thought. I'd ask, and she'd just say she had a cold, that she was fine. I believed her. I didn't press. About 20 minutes later, the ER door opened again. The same doctor came out, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her was a middle-aged man, also in a white coat, perhaps a specialist or a department head. They both walked toward me, their faces grim. My heart began to race. What now? The female doctor spoke first. Sir, we've just received the results of the supplementary tests, and we've discovered something very disturbing. She paused, looking at her colleague. The man stepped forward, holding a file. He pointed to a page. In your wife's blood, besides the sleeping pills, we also found trace amounts of a foreign substance. This substance is not a component of any common sedative. I was bewildered. A foreign substance? What is it? The doctor looked at me intently. It's an industrial chemical, often used as an agricultural preservative or in the illegal production of pesticides. It's extremely toxic. It can cause severe liver and neurological damage if it accumulates in the body over time. A bucket of ice water seemed to dump over me. Industrial chemicals. Pesticides. Where would Sarah have gotten something like that? I shook my head vigorously. That's impossible. My wife is a homemaker. She's never been around things like that. You must be mistaken. The doctor's voice was grave. We ran the test twice. The results were identical. And it's not just in her blood, this substance has been accumulating in her system for some time. This wasn't a one-time exposure. I collapsed back into the chair, speechless. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. Who? Why? How? I looked at the two doctors, pleading. So, is my wife going to be okay? Can you save her? The female doctor sighed. We're doing everything we can, but her condition is very complex. It's possible she took the sleeping pills in a suicide attempt, but the underlying cause of her physical deterioration comes from this poison. She paused, then continued, her voice heavy with implication. I need to ask you one more, very important question. Think carefully before you answer. In the last few weeks, has your wife eaten or drunk anything unusual? Has anyone given her anything to eat, drink, or use? Anyone at all, including family members in your home? That question was like a flash of lightning in my mind. Family members in your home. My sister. Susan. I remembered a few days ago, she had brought over a special blend of herbal tea, claiming it was a gift from a friend back home. It's a superfood, great for your health, she'd said, telling Sarah to brew some. Sarah had even asked what kind of tea it was. Susan just smiled and said, it's an old country recipe, very healthy. Just drink it, you'll see. And I remembered last night's dinner. We had that tea. I thought it tasted a bit bitter, but I figured that's how herbal teas were. Sarah drank it too. She even poured me a cup. But Susan, she said she was too full and didn't have any. I looked up at the doctors, my face drained of color. My lips trembled, and it took me a moment to force out the words. There was a type of herbal tea. My sister brought it over. We drank it last night. The doctor's gaze sharpened like a knife. What kind of tea? Is there any left? Can you bring it here? I left the hospital in a daze. My mind felt numb, with only the doctor's words echoing in my ears, bring it here. As soon as you can. I sped home, my heart heavy. The home I once thought was my sanctuary now looked like a crime scene. I stood at the front door, my hand shaking as I inserted the key. The door opened to the familiar space, but today it felt cold and alien. I walked in, my steps heavy on the tile floor. I looked around, not as a homeowner, but as someone searching for clues. The living room was neat and tidy as always. Sarah's glass was still on the coffee table, half full. I picked it up and sniffed it. No strange smell. I set it down and looked at the bottom. A faint, cloudy residue. I didn't know what it was. It could just be sediment from the filtered water. But now it looked suspicious. I carefully placed the glass in a plastic bag and put it in my backpack. I went upstairs to the bedroom. The room was the same, but something caught my eye. On Sarah's vanity, the makeup was all neatly arranged, but a small jewelry box was slightly askew. I opened it. The earrings and necklaces were there, but her wedding ring was gone. The ring she always wore, the one she never took off. I tried to remember the scene under the tree. Was the ring on her finger? The memory was a blur. I couldn't be sure. I went out to the balcony. The glass door was closed, but I noticed a greasy smudge on the handle, like oil or sweat. I looked down at the floor. The wet trail from last night was dry, but on the tile right next to the door, there was a long, thin, dark line. I turned on my phone's flashlight. It was a strand of hair. But it wasn't Sarah's. Her hair was long and black. This strand was shorter, a light brown color. Whose hair was this? I picked it up carefully and put it in a bag. I stepped out onto the balcony. The wind was still cold. The potted plants Sarah cared for every day were still green and healthy. I looked down to where she had lain. Then, I looked up at the railing. Her footprints were still there, but I saw another, fainter mark, as if someone else had stood there and tried to wipe it away. I leaned over, searching. In a hidden corner of the balcony, behind the largest plant pot, I found something. A cigarette butt. I don't smoke. Sarah doesn't either. And I had never seen Susan smoke. So, where did this come from? I picked it up. The filter was still white, not yet weathered by the elements. It looked recent, probably from last night or this morning. I put it in the bag with the hair. As I was looking around, I heard a noise from the stairs. Footsteps. Familiar footsteps. It was Susan. She walked into the room, her face still etched with panic. But when she saw me on the balcony, her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second. A look that flashed by so quickly, but I caught it. "You're back? How's Sarah?" "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice filled with apparent concern, but it sounded forced. I looked at her, silent for a moment, then asked, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible, "Susan, besides me and Sarah, was anyone else here last night? Did you see any strangers in the house?" My sister's face changed, just for an instant, before returning to normal. "A stranger? Of course not. I went to bed early. I didn't see anyone. Why do you ask?" She answered too quickly, too smoothly, as if she had rehearsed it. I stared at her, into her eyes. She looked away. "Well, I found this cigarette butt on the balcony. I don't smoke. Sarah doesn't either. Do you know who might have?" I held it out. She looked at it, her face paling slightly. I don't know. Maybe a neighbor tossed it over. Or one of your friends who came by. We live on the 3rd floor. The balcony is enclosed. No one could have tossed it over. I said nothing, just put the cigarette back in my pocket. She stood there, wringing her hands. I could see them trembling. I asked another question. "Susan, that herbal tea you brought over the other day. Is there any left? I was thinking of making some." Susan flinched. "Tea? Oh, that herbal stuff? It's all gone. We finished it last night." "Oh, really? That's a shame," I said. "The doctor said Sarah might have food poisoning and wanted to test what she ate yesterday. I was going to bring it for testing." My sister's face went completely white. Her lips moved, but she couldn't speak. After a moment, she stammered, "Poisoning? How could it be poisoning?" "That tea is organic. My friend back home grew it herself." I stared at her without blinking. "Which friend, Susan? Maybe I can call them and ask if they grew anything unusual. Or maybe you could give me their number, I can have them check." Susan took a step back, her face ashen. Her number? I don't remember. We haven't been in touch for a while. Anyway, I'm sure it wasn't the tea. It was probably the weather, or maybe she was just weak. I didn't say anything more. I looked around the room, then at my sister. Suddenly, everything felt different. The familiar walls, the cherished objects, now seemed to be watching me with suspicion. And my sister, the woman I had trusted my whole life, was standing before me, her face a mask of lies. I walked out of the room and down the stairs. At the bottom, I stopped and looked back up. Susan was still standing there, a blurry figure in the shadows. A single, large question echoed in my mind. Besides us, who else was here last night? I didn't go home. I went straight to my best friend, Mark, who worked for the police department. We'd known each other since high school, friends for over 20 years. When he met me at a coffee shop, he took one look at my face and asked, "What happened to you? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer, just pulled everything out of my backpack, the glass, the strand of hair, the cigarette butt. Then I told him everything. Mark listened in silence, not interrupting once. When I was done, his expression had turned serious. "You know, this isn't just a family problem anymore." I swallowed hard. "I know. That's why I came to you." Mark examined the cigarette, then the hair, then the glass. He asked me, "Does anyone know you took these?" I shook my head. "Just me and my sister. I came straight here from the house." Mark nodded. "Okay. Leave it with me. I'll send these to the lab, but we have to keep this completely quiet. Don't let anyone know, especially not your sister." I looked at him, worried. "But what if it's true? What if there really was poison?" Mark sighed. "If it's true, then this is out of your hands. It's a legal matter now, a matter of life and death. I'll have to report it to my superiors, and we'll have to launch an official investigation." I sat there, stunned. Law. Investigation. Words I never thought would be part of my life. Mark looked at me, his voice low. "Do you realize that if we find someone intentionally poisoned your wife, that's a very serious crime? And if that person is a family member, it's unforgivable." I trembled. My sister? Could she really have done something like that? And if she did, why? I looked at Mark, pleading. "What do I do now? I just want to know the truth." Mark put a hand on my shoulder. "For now, you go home. Go home and wait. Don't do anything. Don't ask your sister any more questions. Don't give her any reason to suspect you. If she's involved and she knows you're suspicious, she'll try to cover her tracks. That will only make things harder." I swallowed and nodded. Mark continued, "Wait for my call. I'll get these to the lab and ask for a rush analysis. As soon as I have the results, I'll call you. But remember, do not act on your own. This is a serious matter. You can't take things into your own hands. Understood?" I went home as the light afternoon rain began to fall. The house was quiet and dark. I turned on a lamp and sat down, looking around. Everything was the same, but it felt so cold. Susan was in her room, the door shut. Not a sound. I sat there, listening to the rain and the dry tick-tock of the wall clock. Time crawled by. I stared at my phone, waiting for Mark's call. Every time it buzzed, my heart leaped. But it was always junk mail or a spam call. I sat there wondering, if the lab results confirmed there was poison, how would I face my sister? And if it wasn't her, then who? Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, I sat alone, surrounded by unanswerable questions. I sat there in the dark house, listening to the rain, my mind spinning. I closed my eyes, trying to piece everything together, but the more I tried, the more tangled it became. My sister, Susan, the older sister I had always respected. Since we were kids, she had been like a mother to me. She taught me how to write, she protected me from bullies. And now, in my mind, she was the prime suspect. I remembered the look in her eyes when I asked about the tea. It wasn't concern for her sister-in-law. It was fear. Fear of being caught. But why would she do it? What grudge did she have against Sarah? My wife was gentle, she never raised her voice to anyone. Susan could be critical and meddling, but I never thought she was capable of harming someone. Was it about money? Or jealousy? I shook my head. No, it couldn't be. Then I thought about my mother. She lived back home, visiting occasionally. She and Sarah got along fine, never a harsh word between them. But I did remember my mom once subtly remarking that Sarah wasn't frugal enough, that a daughter-in-law should be a certain way. Could my mother have had something to do with this? No, my mom was a kind, simple woman. Impossible. What about the housekeeper? We had a woman, Maria, who came in weekly. She was from out of state, quiet and diligent. Sarah liked her a lot. But did she have a motive? Or was someone paying her? I remembered Maria had asked for a few days off last week to go home. She said her mother was sick. Was that true? I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. I looked at the corner of the room where Sarah often sat knitting. She was there just a few days ago, smiling, telling me she was knitting me a winter scarf. I tried to hold on to that image, but it dissolved, replaced by her pale face under the tree, her hand clutching that note. The note. I suddenly remembered. In my panic, I had given it to the doctor. It was at the hospital. What did it say? I had only skimmed it, seeing the words, "I'm sorry, my mom is very sick, afraid you'd worry." But was there more? Was a name mentioned? I tried to remember, but my mind was a fog. Then I thought of the neighbors. Mr. Henderson from next door often came over to chat, always asking after Sarah. He seemed nice, but sometimes I caught him staring at her a little too long. Or Mrs. Gable from across the hall, the notorious gossip who loved to talk about Sarah to the other neighbors. Could she have been jealous, wanting to cause harm? I held my head in my hands, thoughts swirling like a hurricane. Everyone I considered, I found a reason to suspect. Then immediately dismissed it, scolding myself for thinking such terrible things about them. They were family, good neighbors. How could they? But if not them, then who? Someone from outside snuck into our home in the middle of the night and poisoned the food? The cigarette butt on the balcony, the strand of hair. Those things didn't just appear. Someone was here. Someone was very close to my wife, the night she went out on that balcony. I looked up towards Susan's room. The door was still closed. What was she doing in there? Sleeping? Or worrying, scared, maybe calling someone to warn them? I stood up, about to go upstairs, but then I sat back down. No. Mark told me to wait. I sat in the chair, my face in my hands, tears starting to fall again. I loved my wife, I hated myself, and I was terrified. Terrified of the truth that it might force me to confront another loved one in this house. Terrified that the line between family and enemy was so terrifyingly thin. My phone vibrated. I jumped, staring at the screen. It was Mark. My heart hammered against my ribs. I answered, my hand shaking. Mark? Do you have the results? On the other end, Mark's voice was grim. Yeah. I have them. Stay right where you are. I'm on my way. 15 minutes later, Mark arrived. He was soaked from the rain, but his face was set, his eyes sharp and focused. One look at him and I knew it was serious. He sat down across from me, said nothing, and pulled a sealed evidence bag from his pocket. The lab results. I just picked them up. Mark placed the bag on the table and stared at me. My hand trembled as I reached for it, but I didn't open it. I looked at him, pleading. Just tell me, what's in there? Mark sighed, his voice low. The glass you gave me had traces of the same industrial chemical the hospital found in your wife's blood. The concentration was low, but it's a definitive match. My heart stopped. And the hair? Mark looked at me. The DNA from the hair was a match for one person. Someone I don't think you're expecting. I swallowed hard. Who? Mark didn't answer right away. He glanced around the house, then asked quietly, "Where's your sister?" "Upstairs in her room." "Hasn't come down all afternoon," I said. Mark nodded. "Good. Let her stay there." He pulled his chair closer to me and lowered his voice. "The hair. I ran it against the database. It doesn't belong to your sister, or your mother, or anyone in your immediate family. It belongs to a woman named Jessica Miller, 32 years old, originally from your hometown." I was dumbfounded. Jessica Miller. I'd never heard the name. Who is that? "I don't know her." Mark looked at me, his eyes full of meaning. "You might not. But your sister does. Jessica Miller is Susan's best friend from high school. They were inseparable. From the same town." I was stunned. My sister's friend? But why was her hair on my balcony? When was she here? Mark shrugged. "That's what I don't know yet. But there's a more important detail. Jessica Miller currently works at an agrochemical plant on the outskirts of the city. A plant that produces various industrial chemicals, including the exact one we found in your wife's blood." My body went cold. A sweat broke out on my forehead. "You mean she took the chemical from her job?" Mark nodded. "It's highly likely. And someone let her into your home, gave her the opportunity to get close to your wife. That person had to be someone from inside, someone familiar with your family's routine, who knew when and what your wife ate." I looked upstairs, toward Susan's closed door. "My sister." Mark held up a hand. "Let's not jump to conclusions. I've had someone tailing Jessica Miller. If she's the one who administered the poison, there has to be a mastermind behind her. And that person is very likely the one who let her in, the one with a motive against your wife." I looked at Mark, my vision blurring. "What motive?" "Sarah is a good person. She wouldn't hurt anyone." Mark was quiet for a moment. "I pulled your sister's phone records from the last few days. One number was called repeatedly. I traced it. It belongs to Jessica Miller. And their last call was at 1 p.m. on the night of the incident, right before your wife went out on the balcony." I felt like I was hearing things. 11 p.m.? You mean right then?" Mark nodded. "Exactly. And about 30 minutes after that call, a woman wearing a hoodie and a mask was caught on the security camera of the convenience store at the end of your block, walking down your alley. About an hour later, she left." I was shaking, unable to speak. Mark looked at me, his voice tense. "I need you to stay calm. We have a clear lead, but to get a conviction, we need more evidence. I'm going to request a warrant to search Jessica Miller's apartment and bring your sister in for questioning." I sat there, staring upstairs, at the silent, closed door. In the quiet house, I could only hear the frantic beating of my own heart. Mark stood up and clapped me on the shoulder. "Stay here. Don't do anything. I'll be back as soon as I have news." He opened the door and stepped out, leaving me alone in the dark with that name, Jessica Miller. I sat there, looking at the stairs, my mind a mess. Jessica Miller, the name echoed in my ears. My sister's best friend. The person who might have put poison in my wife's food. But my sister. Was she involved? Or was she just an unwitting pawn? As I was lost in thought, I heard the bedroom door upstairs creak open. Familiar footsteps. Susan was coming down the stairs, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at me, then glanced around the living room as if searching for someone. "Mark left?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I heard you talking." I stared at her without answering. I just looked into her eyes, at the face of the sister I had loved and respected for 30 years. Susan grew uneasy under my gaze. "Why are you looking at me like that? Is something wrong?" I took a deep breath, and then I spoke, my voice strangely calm. "Susan, I want to ask you something. And I want you to tell me the truth." Susan froze, her face turning pale. "What is it?" I stood up and walked closer to her. I looked directly into her eyes, unflinching. "Do you know Jessica Miller?" My sister's whole body began to tremble. Her lips moved, but no words came out. After a moment, she stammered, "Jessica? She's my friend. Why are you asking?" I kept my eyes locked on hers. The night of the incident with Sarah. Was she here? Susan took a step back, pressing against the wall, her face ashen. No, she wasn't. Why would she be here? Her voice was strained, shaking. I pulled the evidence bag Mark had left from my pocket and took out the plastic bagged strand of hair. This hair was found on our balcony that night. They did a DNA test. It belongs to Jessica Miller. I held the hair up in front of her. Explain it, Susan. Why was your friend's hair on my balcony in the middle of the night? Susan stared at the hair, her eyes wide with panic. She shook her head frantically. No, it can't be. Jessica wouldn't, I don't know. I took another step closer, my voice starting to crack. What else don't you know, Susan? Did you know there was poison in my wife's blood? The same poison your best friend works with every day at her job? Did you know that? My sister crumpled into a chair, her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook, but she made no sound. I stood over her, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed in a vice. Tell me, did you let her into our house? Did you help her put something in Sarah's food? Why? What did Sarah ever do to you? Susan dropped her hands and looked up at me, her eyes were red, but tearless. In them, I saw fear, but also something else. A torment, a pain I couldn't name. She looked at me, her lips trembling, and then she spoke, her voice broken. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't know it would get this bad. Jessica said, she said it would just make her a little sick, so she would stop hurting you. She said she had a way to help me, to help you. I was stunned. Make her sick? Stop hurting me? What are you talking about? Who was hurting me? Susan looked down, sobbing. Your wife. She was taking your money. She was making you miserable. I saw you working day and night, and she was just bleeding you dry. I was worried about you. I just wanted to help you. I staggered back, unable to believe what I was hearing. Help me? You wanted to help me by hurting my wife? My mind was reeling. I looked at my sister, the woman I cherished, with the eyes of a stranger. I whispered, "Do you even know what Sarah was using that money for?" For her mother's medical bills. Her mom is seriously ill. She needs surgery. Sarah was afraid I would worry, so she kept it a secret, sending a little at a time. She was suffering, she was scared, but she never complained once. Susan looked up, her eyes wide with shock. Her lips moved, but she couldn't speak. I looked at her, tears finally streaming down my face. And you listened to your friend and you hurt my wife. Do you know that she took sleeping pills that night? She was trying to kill herself because of the shame, the pain, because she thought her own husband didn't trust her. She almost died, Susan. Do you get that? My sister broke down, wailing. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Jessica said, she said just a little bit, that it wouldn't be serious. I waved my hand dismissively. Not serious? My wife is in the ICU with poison in her system and you say it's not serious? I turned my back, unable to look at her anymore. I looked toward the balcony, where my wife had sat in the cold, her heart broken. Then I looked at my own hands, the hands that had locked that door. The two of us, my sister and I, had each, in our own way, pushed her to the edge. Susan spoke from behind me, her voice trembling. Please, I know I was wrong, but... Jessica. I turned back to her. What about Jessica? Susan swallowed hard, her eyes filled with terror. Jessica, she wasn't just doing what I asked. She had her own motive. She told me your wife was the one who killed her brother 3 years ago. I froze, as if someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water on me. My wife killed Jessica Miller's brother? When? I had never heard Sarah mention anything like that. I stared at my sister, demanding, "What are you talking about? Explain." Susan, shaking, told the story, her voice halting. 3 years ago, Jessica's brother died in a workplace accident. He and Sarah had worked at the same factory before we were married. After the accident, he died. Jessica's family claimed it was Sarah's fault, that she hadn't followed safety procedures and it led to his death. I remembered that, yes, before we were married, Sarah had worked in a factory for a few years, but she never mentioned an accident. I just knew she left because the plant shut down. It turned out there was a dark chapter in her past. Susan continued, Jessica said their family sued Sarah, but there wasn't enough evidence. The case was dismissed. They've held a grudge for 3 years. When I told Jessica about the money, about how Sarah was taking it from you, Jessica said, "See? I told you. That woman killed my brother, and now she's ruining your brother. She needs to be taught a lesson." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. A lesson. They called poisoning someone, driving them to suicide, a lesson. I looked at my sister, the woman I loved, as she trembled, recounting the story. My heart ached, not with anger at her, but with a greater pain. The pain of realizing how hatred can make people so blind. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness, 2 images appeared. One was my wife, a gentle, quiet woman, consumed with caring for her family. The other was Jessica Miller, a woman who carried the pain of losing her brother for 3 years, waiting for a chance at revenge. Who was the real victim? Sarah. If she was at fault, it may have been an accident. But Jessica, a victim in the past, had now become a perpetrator in the present. A vicious cycle of revenge, breeding revenge. And I was standing in the middle of it, my heart torn between my wife and my sister. Susan collapsed on the floor, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I thought it was simple. Just make her a little weak, so she couldn't take advantage of you anymore. I never imagined Jessica had another plan. She said it was just a little bit. I was so stupid." I looked at her, my heart breaking. I knew she loved me, worried about my struggles, but that love, when exploited by hatred, had become a weapon. I couldn't completely blame her, but I couldn't easily forgive her either. I just stood there, watching her cry, watching the pieces of my family shatter. I looked up at the mantelpiece, where a photo of my late father sat. He was smiling gently in the black and white frame. Dad always taught me that family was everything, that we had to love and protect each other. Dad, can you see this? Today, that love has torn our family apart. I turned to my sister, my voice choked with emotion. Susan, do you realize that if, that night, instead of listening to Jessica, you had just talked to me, talked to Sarah, things would have been different? Sarah could have explained. I could have understood. And you wouldn't have been used. Susan looked up at me, her red eyes filled with despair, speechless. I continued, hate is a blinding force, Susan. It makes people deaf to reason. Jessica was blinded by hate, and you. You were blinded by love. You were both wrong. Susan broke down completely, sobbing, grabbing my legs. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I bent down and put a hand on her shoulder, saying nothing. Outside, the rain was still falling. The room was shrouded in darkness and tears. I looked out at the balcony, where my wife had sat in the cold with a shattered heart. I wondered if from the very beginning, any one of us in this family had been willing to just talk to each other. Would that night have ever happened? If I had been willing to ask my wife about the money instead of silently suspecting her. If my sister had been willing to ask me about Sarah's situation instead of listening to a friend's poison, if Jessica Miller had been willing to confront my wife about the truth of what happened 3 years ago instead of nursing her hatred, maybe none of this would have happened. But life has no if-onlys. What's done is done, leaving only a bitter lesson for us all. The next morning, I went to the hospital very early. The corridors were quiet, the only sound my own footsteps on the cold linoleum. The smell of antiseptic was as strong as ever, but today it stung my eyes. I stopped in front of Sarah's room, my hand on the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. I had rehearsed a long speech. I would apologize to her. I would tell her everything I had discovered. I would tell her I loved her, that I believed her, that I would always be by her side. But when the door swung open, all those words vanished. Sarah was lying on the stark white hospital bed. Her face was gaunt and pale, her eyes closed. A tangle of plastic tubes connected her to the machines around her. The ventilator hissed rhythmically, each breath counting down time. I stood in the doorway, afraid to step inside. Then, her eyes slowly opened. She looked at me, saying nothing, just looking. I couldn't describe that look. There was no anger, no blame, no resentment. It was empty, as if she had already traveled very far away, and only her body remained here on this bed. I walked toward her, each step heavy. I pulled up a plastic chair and sat down beside her. I reached out to take her hand, but she pulled it back. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but it felt like a fist closing around my heart. I lowered my head, unable to look at her anymore. "Sarah," I started, but my voice was a hoarse whisper. I'm so sorry." Sarah was silent. I looked up. She was still watching me with that empty gaze. Then she closed her eyes and turned her face to the wall. A single tear rolled down her cheek, fell onto the pillow, and disappeared into the white fabric. I sat there, watching that tear, my heart tearing in two. I wanted to hold her, to tell her how much I loved her, but I couldn't. Her silence was the only answer I needed. It told me that what had happened could never be erased. The wound was too deep. No apology would ever be enough. I sat there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. I don't know. I just watched the small shape of her back, listened to the steady hiss of the machine. 1,000 questions flooded my mind. Would she ever forgive me? Could we ever go back to the way we were? Then I realized how selfish my questions were. I was only thinking about myself. About my own feelings. What about her? What had she endured? I spoke softly, my voice a whisper in the quiet room. I know everything. About the money for your mom, about the tea. And about Jessica Miller. Her shoulders flinched. After a moment, she turned back to look at me. This time, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not hope, but shock. She looked at me, her chapped lips moving. After a moment, she uttered a single sentence, her voice as faint as a breeze. "Do you know what really happened to her brother? 3 years ago?" I shook my head. Sarah closed her eyes again, another tear tracing a path down her cheek. She spoke, each word weak, but clear. "That day, I tried to save him. I pulled him away from the machinery, but it was too late. I still have the scar on my hand where the glass cut me." She held up her thin hand, pointing to a faint white line on her wrist. "I will never forget his death." But she never believed me. I stared at my wife, at that scar. So for the past 3 years, she had carried not only the trauma of a coworker's death, but also the hatred of his family. She had tried to save a man's life and had been condemned for it. And now I, her husband, had also condemned her. I took her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. I held her thin, trembling hand, pressed my face into her palm, and I cried. I cried like a child. A week later, the whole story came out. Jessica Miller was arrested at her workplace. In her apartment, the police found a container of the same industrial chemical that was in Sarah's blood. She confessed to everything. 3 years of nursing a grudge, finally paid for with a sentence of probation. Probation wasn't freedom, it was a mark she would carry for life, a stain that could never be washed away. My sister, as an accomplice, was brought in for questioning multiple times. In the end, she was not charged, due to her lack of knowledge about the chemical's true danger and her full cooperation with the investigation. But she couldn't stay in our home. Every time she looked at Sarah, she would start to cry, her body trembling. A month later, she asked to go back home to live with our mother. I saw her off at the bus station. We hugged and cried, unable to find the words. She said she would be back when things settled down. I knew that one might be a very long time from now. Or maybe never. Our home became empty. At every meal, there were just the two of us. Sarah spoke less now. She still cooked, still cleaned, still smiled at me, but her smile no longer reached her eyes. It was like a faint, distant shadow. Many nights, I would wake up to find her sitting alone on the balcony, staring down at the street. I would go out and sit with her, not daring to ask, just sharing the cold silence with her. The balcony, where the tragedy began, had now become our shared nightmare. On clear nights, we would often sit out there. Sarah would look at the railing, at the spot where her footprints had been on that fateful night. I would watch her, my heart aching. I knew she was reliving the past, reliving the most desperate moment of her life. Once, I asked her quietly, "Do you forgive me?" She was silent for a long time, then she turned to look at me. In her eyes, I saw a profound sadness, but also a tiny, flickering spark of warmth. She didn't answer, just placed her hand on mine. It was a gentle squeeze, but I understood. It wasn't complete forgiveness. It was acceptance. Acceptance to keep living, acceptance that the wound was still there, acceptance that we would have to live with it for the rest of our lives. Mark, my best friend, still drops by sometimes. He told me that after Jessica Miller finished her probation, she moved away, and no one has heard from her since. Her family, ashamed, also keeps to themselves. My sister, back home, spends her days volunteering at a local church, praying for forgiveness. My mother called, her voice trembling, asking about Sarah. "I'm so ashamed," she said. "Please tell your wife I'm so sorry." I passed on the message. Sarah just gave a sad smile and said nothing. Yesterday, I went out on the balcony alone. The air was cool, the first winds of autumn blowing gently. I looked down at the oak tree. Its leaves were beginning to turn yellow and gold. I looked up at the gray sky and wondered if my wife could still see any color, or if her world was now only shades of gray from the past. I heard the soft shuffle of slippers behind me. It was Sarah, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. She handed one to me and leaned against the railing, looking out into the distance. We stood there in silence as a light drizzle began to fall. The mug in my hands was warm, but a corner of my heart remained cold. Cold from the losses that could never be recovered, cold from the wounds that would never heal. Sarah spoke softly, her voice like a wisp of smoke. "Honey, let's move." I turned to look at her. She was still staring into the distance, her eyes glistening. "I can't stay here anymore. Every time I come out on this balcony, I remember." I nodded, squeezing her hand. "Okay, let's move. Anywhere you want to go, I'll go with you." The rain started to fall harder. We went inside, closing the glass door behind us. Through the rain-streaked glass, the balcony was a blurry, distorted image. A part of our lives had died out there. But I knew we would go on living with the scars, living with the lessons, and living with each other. Because after everything, we still had each other. Writing this, my hands still tremble, not from the cold, but because the past is still here, a dull ache in my very bones. I wanted to tell you about the lessons that no school can teach, the ones that life, in its cruelest way, forces you to learn. The first lesson: never judge until you know the whole story. I looked at numbers on a bank statement, I listened to my sister's words, and I decided my wife was a thief. I didn't ask, I didn't investigate, I didn't give her a chance. It turned out that behind those numbers was the fear of a daughter about to lose her mother. Behind her silence was the fear of worrying her husband. I passed judgment, knowing only a fraction of the truth. And the price of that haste was almost the life of the person I love most. The second lesson: hatred solves nothing. It only breeds more hatred. Jessica Miller held on to her grudge for 3 years. She thought revenge would bring her peace, but in the end, she lost everything: her freedom, her reputation, and the last shred of compassion within her. And we, the ones left behind, must carry these emotional scars for the rest of our lives. If she had just been able to sit down and talk to my wife 3 years ago, maybe things would have been different. But hatred had blinded her. The third lesson: love needs wisdom. My sister loved me. She was worried about me working so hard, worried about my wife taking my money. But her love lacked clarity, it lacked understanding, and it was exploited by someone with a dark heart. She thought she was protecting her little brother, but she was actually pushing him into a tragedy. Love is not enough. You have to know how to listen, how to put yourself in someone else's shoes, how to ask before you act. The fourth lesson: family is where we are most vulnerable. Because we trust absolutely, when suspicion arises, it cuts deeper than any wound from the outside world. I suspected my wife. My wife suspected herself. My sister suspected the goodness in others. And all that suspicion, combined with hatred from an outsider, nearly destroyed my family. In every family, there are unspoken things. Worries, burdens, silent sacrifices. My wife sacrificed in silence, enduring it all because she was afraid to worry me. I didn't see that sacrifice. My sister didn't see that worry. And we all paid the price. I look at my wife now. Every day is a struggle for her to keep going. The wound in her heart may never fully heal. It will always be there, a dull ache, a reminder of a cold winter night, of a locked balcony door, of the sleeping pills that she swallowed. But she is still here. She still holds my hand. She still tries, every single day. And for me, that is enough. The final lesson I learned is that sometimes, forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about accepting it, living with it, and choosing to move forward, together. So, in your home, is there someone suffering in silence? Is there a pain simmering that you know nothing about? Don't wait until it's too late to realize that happiness is far more fragile than you think. This afternoon, I went out on the balcony again. Not for punishment, not to escape, but just to sit there. To look at the plants my wife still tends, to watch the last, weak rays of sunlight filter through the railing. The balcony is no longer a place of horror for me, it is a reminder. A reminder of how fragile happiness is, of how silence can kill a soul, of how a single, thoughtless moment is enough to lose everything you hold dear. My wife is inside, cooking dinner, waiting for me. Every day that passes is a day we learn to heal together. It's not easy. But we have each other. If this story has touched you, please, just pause for a moment. Look at your own home. Is there someone suffering in silence? Is there a pain you've never asked about? Don't wait until it's too late.